Howdy, it's Kyle with a video talking about my home state of California. And this is a video I shouldn't have to do, but I feel like I do have to do it because of so much of the anti-California rhetoric coming from the media right now, which has just gotten completely out of hand. And at first it was kind of like, oh, just really annoying. Then it was kind of irritating. And now it's to the point where it's kind of disturbing, if not dangerous. The California hate is coming primarily from two different groups. One, people that have never been there, and two, people that are from there that haven't been anywhere else. So when you don't have a very good frame of reference to compare one place to another, you're having to rely on the media to tell you about these places. And of course, the media are going to be completely biased. So if you watch Fox News or MSNBC, you know that it is political propaganda. You know they are lying to you. So you know when you turn that on that what you're going to hear is not the truth. So what does Sean Hannity and Rachel Maddow know about California or geography in general? Absolutely nothing. They sit behind a desk and spew political propaganda for a living, hoping you'll believe it. But with that being said, this video itself is not a political video. I'm going to be talking about the geography of California and how that affects some of the issues going on in the state. So if you're expecting to hear some right-wing or left-wing garbage going on, well, you've clicked on the wrong video. Several months ago, I posted a video about moving from California to the South, and it had absolutely nothing to do with politics. It was talking about climate and food and culture and music kind of stuff. But 99% of the comments on it were completely political. So I'm sure it'll happen with this one too. But this video is not political, it's geography. I'm going to first start talking about the basic geography of the state. It's the most populous state in the country with about 40 million people. But because it is the most populous state, a lot of folks think that it might be either overpopulated or overcrowded. But it definitely is not, and I'm going to show you why. From the Oregon border down to the Mexican border, California takes up a huge amount of space. If it were along the East Coast, it would stretch from Boston, Massachusetts down to Charleston, South Carolina. So in California, there are 40 million people, but that same amount of space that California takes up, if it were along the East Coast, would have 70 million people. So there are a lot more people back east. If you think California is overcrowded, you should see North Carolina or Virginia or Maryland or New York. The East Coast is way more crowded than California. California is actually mostly empty. And that's on top of the fact that there are over 18 million people in the Los Angeles metro area and over 8 million in the San Francisco Bay Area. So you have about 27 million people of the state's population in just these two major metro areas. Got 3 million in San Diego, 2.5 million in Sacramento. So most of the people are in these major cities. Most of the rest of the state is pretty lightly populated. The most defining feature of California's physical geography is the climate, and it's pretty well known that the climate is really nice. It's just about the best weather in the world, but why is that? In the northern hemisphere, the ocean currents rotate in a clockwise direction. So off the west coast of the US, the currents are coming down from Alaska, which is of course going to be very cold. And if you've been to the ocean in California, dipped your toe in the water and was like, man, this is freezing, that's why. And how this gives California the best climate in the world is that you have these cool maritime air masses sitting offshore, and they have a moderating effect on the temperature. So during the summertime, if the land will be really hot, you have these cool ocean breezes, this maritime air mass keeping things moderated. It never really gets that hot along the California coast. But it also has a moderating effect in the winter as well. So the ocean temperature is only maybe 55 degrees or so, but during the winter time, that's relatively warm. So the land is cooler. The air is having a moderating effect on the land as well, so it can't get that cold. It doesn't get that cold along the coast either. But I do want to point out that not everywhere in California has that perfect climate. About 27 million people in the state live in a county that sits along the coast, so most people do have that climate, but not everyone. So if you live in the valley, the mountains, or the deserts, the climate won't be perfect at all, but it still will be a lot nicer than most of the eastern U.S. And as I've said before in many other videos, the climate is the single most important aspect of where you live. It affects every single thing you do, what you're going to wear, what's even in your closet in the first place. So climate is extremely important, and people are willing to pay a premium to live in the places that have the best climate. People that have as much money to live wherever they want but aren't homebodies are primarily going to live in 3 places in the U.S. the coast of California, New York City, and South Florida. So this is where you have huge concentrations of big-time mega millionaires. So not just the 1%, but the 0.1%. So people are willing to pay a ton of money to live along the coast, and they're willing to overpay to live in that climate, which causes the housing prices to go up for everybody. But it's not just that. It's also people that, quote unquote, have a place in California. So you have these mega millionaires from England or China or Japan or the Arab world or Canada or Texas that have a place in California where they might go to a couple of weeks of the year, but don't actually live there. Nobody has a place in Kansas or Mississippi or West Virginia. People do have a place in California. So you have not only people that are willing to overpay for these houses, but now you have people that are reducing the housing stock by having these houses that they only use for a couple of weeks of the year. So you have overpriced houses and people that can afford to pay way too much. And now you have reduced stock and people that just have a house are not going to really spend much time there. So it's a double whammy that affects the high housing costs for everybody in the state. But the wonderful climate of California has another negative effect on the state as a whole, and that's on the air pollution. So between the topography of the state, which is often valleys surrounded by high mountains, you're in the westerly wind belt, and you have a thermal inversion layer off the coast. So those three things help to keep air pollution a lot worse. So most parts of the country, most parts of the world, smog and ozone and other pollutants can escape into the atmosphere. But in California, you have that thermal inversion layer that keeps things trapped, makes the air pollution worse than it otherwise would normally be. Back in the 1960s, the air pollution was so bad in Los Angeles, people are walking around with masks on, kind of like nowadays you see people in Beijing wearing that because the air pollution is so bad. So as a result, the state had to do something, so they enacted stricter air quality standards for their vehicles, which were stricter than the federal emission standards. I don't know all the ins and outs of the chemistry of the air pollution standards, but I do know in California you have to have extra stuff added to the car to make it compliant. The gas stations themselves have to have special pumps to keep the fumes from going into the air. So there are several things that go on in the gasoline in California that causes it to cost more. So you can vote for politicians that will lower the gas tax or even eliminate the gas tax, but that's not going to solve the problem of high gas prices. So on average, Californians are paying about 20 cents more per gallon in gas taxes than other states, but you're paying about $1.50 more per gallon than gas in other states. So even eliminating the gas tax isn't going to cause the gas to be cheaper. So it's not the taxes, it's the stuff that has to be done to meet the air pollution standards that have to be there because the air pollution would be so bad if they weren't there. And the reason why they would be so bad if they weren't there is because the climate is so wonderful. So great climate, but it causes houses to be more expensive and causes gas to be more expensive. The next issue I want to talk about that has to do with the climate is the homelessness problem. And I guarantee you right now, there are news sources showing the exact same video of the Skid Row in LA and San Francisco saying that the homelessness problem there is indicative of the entire state, which would be pretty funny if it weren't for the fact that people genuinely believe this. Without a doubt, homelessness is a major issue that affects everywhere in the U.S. It's not just California, but it gets blown out of proportion with California because the scenes look so much worse, but it really isn't any worse when you consider the fact that homeless people in other parts of the country have places to hide. There's nowhere to hide in San Francisco. I live in Chattanooga. Just downtown Chattanooga alone has hundreds of homeless people, but they're not so obvious because they're tucked away a little bit. There's little homeless camps in empty buildings. There's derelict warehouses. There's an empty rail line that goes through downtown. There are back alleys that aren't being used. But in San Francisco, every single square inch of town is being used. The real estate is so expensive that everything is being used. There are no empty buildings. There are no empty warehouses. There are no derelict factories. And every alley is being used by something. Even the alleys have names there because they're being used. So as a result, the homeless are out in the open. They're in your face. You can't possibly avoid them. But that's nothing new. I remember when I was a little kid, we'd walk through San Francisco, get to meander through all the hordes of homeless people. So it's something different now. A lot of the homeless in the Bay Area go to San Francisco specifically because they can kind of be with other homeless people. So you have a large concentration of it there, but it isn't indicative of the entire state by any means. But how the climate once again affects us is that because the climate is so nice, specifically that it doesn't get that cold during the winter, a lot of homeless people are drawn to California. So say you're homeless in Minnesota, you've got $50 to your name, you might hop on a bus to LA and be like, if I have to sleep on the streets, I want to be somewhere where I'm not going to die. Or places that are really cold, like New York is really bad about this. They'll literally put homeless people on a bus and ship them to California. So the overall homelessness in the state isn't any worse than other places, but it is going to be really obvious in San Francisco because, again, there's no place for the homeless to hide, or in LA that just has a legendary Skid Row. And of course, the climate is also going to have a hugely negative effect on the wildland fire situation in the state, which has gotten pretty bad in recent years. The frequency and the severity of the fires has gone up in recent years, but not to the extent that you might think. The bigger problem is that people are moving to these areas that are more susceptible to fires. And then there are the issues with the power being shut off in the areas that are having the fires. Now, I don't know all the ins and outs of the political situation behind that and all the guys in the suits, what they're talking about, but I know that when I worked for South Carolina, when there was a hurricane coming, the power would be shut off along the coast. Like, what are we talking about here? Of course, you're going to shut the power off before the hurricane comes. You're not going to leave it on so they have these live wires flapping around in the breeze when the power lines get blown down. So cutting the power off before a disaster was nothing new. It's something you kind of have to do. But again, I don't know all the ins and outs of the political stuff behind that, but the power is going to be shut off regardless of who the governor or the state senate is. The next issue I'm going to talk about is illegal immigration. And California has a lot of illegal immigrants, probably the most of any state, but it's hard to say for sure, but it probably does. It sits right along the Mexican border, so you're likely to have a higher percentage of illegal Mexican immigrants than other states. But the main reason why you have so many illegal immigrants in California is because it is by far the #1 agricultural state in the country, by far the top crop producing state in the country, which is again due to the wonderful climate that gives you a full year-round growing season. Go to your grocery store, look in the produce section, and half the stuff there was grown within 3 hours of where I grew up. So it has a lot of stuff going on there in terms of agriculture, but for whatever reason, citizens don't want to be the ones working in the field. I'll give you a perfect example. A friend of mine was a hiring manager at an orange packing plant in Central California. So during the wintertime, which is the orange picking season, there would be ads out there saying we're going to hire 50 or 100 seasonal workers to pick oranges and to pack them. So who shows up to apply for these jobs? If there are 100 jobs available, say 300 people show up, and he's like 298 of them are Mexicans, most of them are going to be illegal. The other two are these glazed eyes white folks methed out. So who am I going to hire? It's either hire a bunch of illegal Mexicans or let the oranges rot on the ground. So it's an impossible situation. It's either you let your business tank or you hire illegal immigrants. It's really a no-brainer for the farmers out there. They have to hire the illegals because citizens won't do the work. So anywhere you go that has a lot of agriculture is going to have a lot of illegal immigrants. It's just that California has by far the largest agricultural sector, is by far the largest crop producing state. So you're going to have a lot more illegal immigrants working in the ag field. But it's not any different back east, because I know for a fact in Georgia and Alabama, there are a lot of illegals working out in the fields. But because those states aren't anywhere near as big agriculturally as California, they don't have as many. So you combine that with the fact that California sits along the Mexican border, and of course you're going to have a lot of illegal Mexican immigrants in the state. It's just pure geography. So those are the biggest problems facing California, and I guarantee you can turn on some media right now and they're talking about these issues and trying to find someone to blame for it. But I can make a video like that on any state. I can spend hours ripping on every single state in the country because they all have problems. So it's just that California is so much bigger than all the other states. When things happen there, it tends to get blown out of proportion more. And here's a perfect analogy. Right now, there's a good chance there's a car on fire in the town you live in. And that's pretty common. Cars catch on fire, but it won't make the local news. I mean, why would it? It's a car catching on fire. But if a Tesla catches on fire, it is national news. So even though Teslas catch on fire at a lower rate than average cars, when it happens, it's big time news. So always be mindful of the source of the information. So if it has something to do with geography or something that might even be remotely tied to politics, be careful, because I guarantee you right now, Fox News is talking about how the homelessness problem and the high housing costs and the wildfires and gas prices are all because of liberals. And MSNBC is talking about how any issues in California are because these poor states in the Southeast are siphoning off of it, and California is having to subsidize these poor states in the South. So just remember, the political agenda associated with both sides of the media, you know they're lying. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up to let me know you approve, and subscribe to this channel if you're interested in hearing about U.S. geography or cross-country road tripping or comparing places to others, ranking things, just nerdy stuff about the U.S. But yeah, thanks for watching. Geography King signing out.